Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legal Power Hour, where we jam 60 minutes of thought-provoking discussion into a 30-minute show designed to inform, awaken, and protect our fellow American citizens. Host Tom Scott and Sarah Nahidi, and today it is an absolute pleasure to have with us is our guest, Arlington, Virginia, former CIA officer, and New York Times best-selling author, Kiriakou. Welcome to our show, John.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. A pleasure to have you on. If you could, our viewers, can we get the Cliff Notes version summary of your life for viewers who haven't heard about you? Can you tell us how you went from your life?
Sure. It's a long story, and I'll make it very, very short. I joined the CIA in January of 1990 as an analyst working in the Directorate of Intelligence. I worked on Iraq for about 7.5 years, got bored, and switched to operations, to counterterrorism operations specifically. It was a very unusual switch at the time. Served more than several overseas tours. After September 11th, I became the chief of CIA counterterrorism operations in Pakistan, and in that role led a series of raids that resulted in the capture of Abu Zubaydah, who the CIA believed at the time was the #3 in Al-Qaeda. I returned to headquarters then to become the executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director for operations, and I left the CIA in mid-2004 to go into the private sector. Now, Abu Zubaydah had been tortured in a secret CIA facility. I was asked before that torture began if I wanted to be trained in what the CIA was calling the use of enhanced interrogation techniques. I said that I had an ethical and legal problem with that. I thought that it was a torture program. I thought that it was illegal. It was certainly unethical and immoral, and I declined. As it turned out, I was the only one of 14 people approached who declined to be trained. But I kept the secret to myself for many years, actually. And then finally, after I left the CIA in December of 2007, Brian Ross of ABC News asked if I would come on his show. He said that he had a source who said that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. I said that was absolutely untrue. I was the only person who was kind to Abu Zubaydah. I never touched Abu Zubaydah or any other prisoner. And he said, well, you're welcome to come on the show and defend yourself. Well, President Bush, in the meantime, was lying directly to the American people by looking in the camera and saying, we do not torture. I knew that was a lie. And then finally he said that if there was torture, it was the result of a rogue CIA officer. And I knew that was a lie. And I thought, well, by God, they're going to try to pin this on me. I'm going to just come clean and I'm going to tell the truth. And I called Brian Ross and I said, I'll do your interview. And I decided that no matter what he asked me, I would tell the truth. And so I did. And I said 3 things in that interview. I said that the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official U.S. government policy. It was not the result of a rogue. And I said that the policy had been personally approved by the President of the United States. So within 24 hours, the FBI began investigating me. They investigated me for 1 whole year, from December 2007 to December 2008. And then in December 2008, they concluded that I had not committed a crime and they closed the case against me. A month later, January 2009, Barack Obama is inaugurated. Barack Obama, the most transparent president in history, I might add. What I did not know was that the CIA had secretly asked Obama to reopen the case against me. And so for the next 3 years, the FBI was in my emails. They were tapping my phones. I was under FBI surveillance. And then in January of 2012, I was charged with 5 felonies coming out of that original interview, including 3 counts of espionage, the gravest crime with which an American can be charged, and which in many cases carries with it the death penalty. So I fought those charges for 10 months. I was facing 45 years in prison, which essentially is a death sentence. I'm 53 years old. And so Eventually, the government came back. When they finally understood that I was willing to go to trial and I was willing to testify on my own behalf and talk about some of the hideous things that I had witnessed in my 15 years at the CIA, they came back with an offer of 30 months, of which I would serve 23. I actually turned that offer down. And then one of my 11 lawyers pulled me aside and said, listen, this can be a blip in your life, or it can be the defining event of your life. I urge you to make it the blip. He said, if you were my brother, I would beg you to take this deal. And then another one of my attorneys said, you seem to think that this is about right or wrong, innocence or guilt. It's not. It's about cutting your losses. The government doesn't lose its cases. It's not going to get any better than this. And so I took the deal. And then I got out after 23 months. And I've tried to move on since then.
John, that's unbelievable. I mean, I'm still floored at what you've been through. I mean,
I wouldn't wish it on anybody, not my worst enemy.
I can only imagine. Can you tell our viewers what you've been up to since you've gotten out of prison?
Sure. I'm trying to patch something together, and I think I've succeeded. I have 2 books that have come out since I got home. One is called Doing Time Like a Spy: How the CIA Taught Me to Survive and Thrive in Prison. And it's a collection of blogs that I wrote for prison, which I got in serious trouble for, but continued to do. I wrote 19 of them. And sort of a how-to book. The dirty tricks that the CIA taught me to use in training that I was able to use in prison to keep myself safe. And the second one is The Convenient Terrorist. It's a book I wrote with Joe Hickman, a former Guantanamo guard. When the CIA turned over custody of Abu Zubaydah to the military, it was to Joe Hickman. So I wrote half the book, Joe wrote half the book, and it came out last month. I also have a weekly syndicated column that runs on reader-supportednews.org. And, you know, Washington has a reputation as being the city of second chances. There's no second chance for me in Washington. But there is a second chance for me in Los Angeles. And since I've been home, I've sold 3 different television shows to 3 different networks. One with Oliver Stone, one with Alec Baldwin, and one with the director Simon West, who won an Academy Award for Black Hawk Down. The show I sold with Simon has actually gone to pilot. And so I seem to find myself as a television writer now. So, you know, little by little, I've patched something together, and it's turned out to be a decent living.
That's amazing.
It's certainly not CIA work, I can tell you that.
You take an oath of office to defend, and then you take an oath of office to defend, you know, security and confidentiality and everything else. Well, when those 2 are in conflict,
yeah, right.
If the oath that you took to the U.S. Constitution is in conflict, and the oath that you took is in conflict, you have to defer to the higher authority.
Absolutely.
Which is the U.S. Constitution. So
absolutely.
Absolutely. We defend the Constitution. That's the underlying fabric of our nation. So I just don't, you know, I don't get it. You know, it's just you know, again, the 2 sets of rules. You know, for John Kiriakou, there's one set of rules. For Hillary Clinton, there's another set of rules. What's your feeling on that? And how does, I mean, I'm upset just observing it, never mind living it. You know what I mean? What do you have to say at that?
Hillary Clinton should have gone to prison for a very long time, plain and simple. But you're absolutely right, Tom. There are 2 completely separate sets of rules. If you, especially under the Obama administration, I think Obama was probably the worst offender of recent presidents, although George H.W. Bush was pretty bad too. But if you were a friend of the president, or you had 4 shiny stars on your shoulder, you're going to get away with murder. You know, General Campbell, who leaked the fact that the U.S. intelligence community had created the Stuxnet virus, he leaked that to the New York Times because he was bragging about his own role in the creation of the Stuxnet virus. He was arrested. He was charged with a felony, a count of espionage. He was found guilty. And before he was even sentenced, President Obama pardoned him. Why? Because according to the New York Times, he was, quote, the president's favorite general. Well, if you're the president's favorite general or the president's favorite whatever, or a friend of the president, you're going to get off. Now, I was convicted. I took a plea to confirming the name of a former CIA colleague to a journalist. The journalist never revealed the name. The name was never made public. All right? General Petraeus leaked the names of 10 covert operatives to his adulterous girlfriend. But because he was a friend of the president, he was charged only with one misdemeanor count of mishandling classified information. He got 18 months of unsupervised probation and never served a single hour in jail. Not a single hour. The day after his sentencing, he went to Iraq on a mission for the White House. He actually got to keep his security clearance. So the hypocrisy to me is utterly sickening. You know, I told Sarah earlier off camera before we started recording the show that I try very hard to not be bitter, to not be angry, because it doesn't help me in any way to be angry. But this makes me angry because the justice system is not just. You know, African Americans often say that the justice system is exactly that. It's just us. Well, you know, I feel the same way. I feel like I got screwed by my government. And Tom, you make a very important point here. And that point is when anything, whether it's a law or a policy or a signed secrecy agreement, is in conflict with the Constitution wins out every time. On my very first day at the CIA, I put my right hand in the air and I swore to uphold and to protect the Constitution against all enemies, domestic and foreign. Now, I can't believe that I was the only one of the 300 or 400 people in that auditorium that day who took that oath seriously. But I did. I took it seriously. Without the Constitution, we have nothing. We have chaos. It's the Constitution that makes this a great country. It's the Constitution that allows us to believe in things like American exceptionalism. Well, I took that very seriously.
Yep. Well, like you just said, it's not just threats abroad, it's domestic. I mean, that's the domestic. Whole, when we get sworn in, it's domestic. And sometimes that's the greater threat, you know. I think we should be policemen of the world, and I don't think we should be doing all these things internationally that we are, unless we're asked for help. But, you know, certainly
100%.
When the government starts, and, you know, with the whole thing with these prosecutors, and this is one of my cases that I have going back east right now against an attorney, Joseph Michaud, who's committed a bunch of felonies in a particular case. He's committed state and federal crimes, perjury, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. Now, I'm trying to get the attention of the FBI and the DOJ, which I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But, you know, a prosecutor does not have to I mean, I could murder somebody, and if they don't want to prosecute me,
they call it prosecutorial discretion. Yeah, prosecutorial discretion.
Absolutely. 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 And if they want to prosecute someone for spitting on the sidewalk or smoking in public, someone like you kind of just said with the general, you know, Petraeus, you know, 10 major instances of leaks of security, and they turn a blind eye. They have that prerogative. So, one other thing I want to ask too is the prison industrial complex, which we write about in our book. That's, you know, there's many problems in the system. No competition is probably number one. But what do you think of the prison industrial complex, the privatization of prisons, the police state that we're in right now?
Wow, I think this is one of the major problems facing our country today. Wow, where do I even begin? You know, the United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population. Now, most of those prisoners, something like 92% of them, are in local and state jails and prisons. So reform, which is absolutely necessary, has to begin at the local and the state level. There's a wonderful book that came out in 2012, written by Dr. Harvey Silverglate, who's a professor of law at Harvard University. The book is called 3 Felonies a Day. And Silverglate argues that we are so over-legislated in this country, so over-regulated and over-criminalized that the average American on the average day going about his or her normal daily business commits 3 felonies. So if they want to get you, they're going to get you. And there's nothing you can do about it. I've written extensively about cases like a fisherman who caught a halibut that was too small. Well, instead of keeping it on board and letting it die and taking it into port to measure it to determine that it was too small, he threw it back in the ocean. Well, somebody saw him throw it back in the ocean. Do you know that that's a felony? It's a felony. And he was charged with a felony and had to go all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, he eventually won, but how many millions of dollars of the taxpayers' money was wasted to prosecute this fisherman for throwing a fish back in the water? There's a woman who worked for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Hawaii who was charged with a felony count of interfering with the feeding of a wild animal for whistling at a whale. She whistled at a whale as it was eating a seal. And the FBI decided that it was necessary to break down the door of her house at 6 o'clock in the morning to haul her out and confiscate all of her electronics and all of her business records. And she was utterly ruined. She ended up taking a plea to a misdemeanor charge of violating the Endangered Species Act or some nonsensical thing. But is this really the way that we need to prosecute cases in this country? Do these people really need to be in prison? Is society better off having the fisherman and this woman from NOAA in prison? I think not. Now, my experience was in the federal system. It's my understanding that private prisons are far, far worse than government prisons, and it's because of the profit motive. The only way for private prison companies to make money is to save money on food and on medical care. I've written extensively about this. So you have people dying, literally dying in prison because they're not getting medical care. Well, you know, there are bad people in prison, but most of them don't have a death penalty case. And whether the government likes it or not, at whatever level, local, state, or federal, they have to take care of these people. Now, I personally believe that we made a terrible mistake during the Reagan administration and extending through the Clinton administration. Bill Clinton actually made it far worse with this so-called war on drugs. And what we did is we incarcerated an entire generation of people. You know, when 1 out of every 4 black men in this country is either in prison, in jail, on probation, or on parole, there's a problem. And in the meantime, the government's done nothing to restrict the flow of drugs into this country. So that, coupled with the fact that they've phased out educational programs, they've phased out training programs, they've phased out counseling and therapy, all you're doing is you're just incarcerating people. And all that's going to do is piss them off. And eventually they're going to get out and they're going to go back home. And they're going to be angry and they're going to be broke and they can't read and they can't write and they have no job skills. And what do you think they're going to do? They're going to return to a life of crime. So the money is better spent on education and on training and on drug and alcohol therapy than on incarcerating more and more and more people and hoping that you can just arrest and prosecute everybody who's broken a law. The entire system is broken. From the prosecutors to the judges to the prison administrators, it's broken.
John, what are some of your suggestions as to how to address our broken legal system?
First, I think we have to decriminalize, and indeed, I think we have to legalize marijuana. You can't imagine the people who are doing hideous stretches of time on charges related to marijuana. I'll give you an example, and this is just an anecdote, but this is something that has really stuck with me. There was a guy in my housing unit who arrived about a year after I got there. His family never missed a single weekend. He had a lovely wife and 3 beautiful children, and they visited him every single Saturday. And I asked him one day, "What are you in for?" And he said, "I got caught transporting 12 pounds of marijuana." And I said, "What did you get?" He said, "They gave me 12 and a half years. And it wasn't even his. He said he was being paid to move it from point A to point B. He was a mule. And I said, 12 years for weed, really? And he said, yeah, 12 years. He said, to make matters worse, he said, I had a successful heating and air conditioning company, and I employed 10 people. So he said, when I got arrested and prosecuted, not only did it ruin my family, and he said, for that I take responsibility, but I lost my business in this isolated rural area in Pennsylvania, and 10 people were thrown out of work. So is society really better off because this guy's locked up for 12 years for having marijuana in his car? I think not. The first thing we need to do is end this ridiculous war on drugs. We need to legalize marijuana and treat it like alcohol. Sell it in liquor stores, have the government tax it. It's not addictive. It causes less harm than cigarettes or than alcohol. It should be legal. That's the first thing. The second thing is we need very, very serious sentencing reform. Now, there has been a bipartisan bill in Congress since 2015. It has passed committees in both the House and the Senate when the Democrats ran the Congress and when the Republicans ran the Congress. But Eric Holder was against it, and Jeff Sessions is against it. And so neither Harry Reid nor Mitch McConnell would allow it to come to the floor of the Senate for a vote. Okay, this has bipartisan support, and it would be to reform the sentencing laws and to do away with most mandatory minimum sentences. You know, we've got these sentences now where you can be a first-time nonviolent drug offender, first-time nonviolent drug offender, and get 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in prison. First time. There's no second chance. Now, if you have attacked and raped a child, yes, you should die in prison. If there's violence in your case, definitely. If there's a gun in your case, sure, you should be in prison. But if you're out there smoking weed, or maybe you get caught for the very first time you're manufacturing meth or something, or you have a substance abuse problem, you shouldn't be in prison, at least not for these ridiculous stretches of time. Now, another thing that needs to be addressed right away at every level of the prison industrial system is that in our country, for whatever reason, we treat mental illness as a disciplinary problem rather than as a medical one. And so the prisons are filled with crazy people who should be in hospitals, not in prisons. And I'll give you another example. One of my cellmates was a guy named James. James was on federal probation. He was homeless. He was living in a cardboard box under a bridge in Pittsburgh. And he violated the terms of his probation just so that he could spend the winter indoors, right? You violate parole, probation, you do 3, maybe 4 months inside. Well, he purposely violated in October so he could spend November, December, January, and February indoors, have 3 square meals a day, and maybe some medical care. So he got to the prison. This is 3.5 months before I went home. He got to the prison. He was assigned to my cell. And he came in his first day, put out his hand, introduced himself around. Hi, guys. I'm James. This is what I'm in for. And he said, I'm going to warn you about something. He said, I am certifiably insane. He said, I make no bones about it. I'm insane. But if I'm on my medication, I'm okay. If I'm off my medication, I'm going to apologize to you guys right now. I'm going to be nuts. Well, sure enough, they wouldn't give him his medication. They said, well, you're only here for 4 months. This medicine's expensive. We don't want to spend, you know, $1,000 a week or whatever it was to give you your medication. So he had no medication. Well, guess what? He went crazy. And they ended up doing what they do with all crazy people. They put him in solitary confinement, which made him even crazier. Now, the United Nations has declared the American form of solitary confinement to be a form of torture, which it is. I'm telling you, it's torture. And he went even crazier in solitary. So what did they do to address his craziness in solitary? They stripped him naked, they beat him to a bloody pulp, and they threw him outside. And I'm talking about in January. They threw him outside. Now, I had a friend who was in the cell next to him, Jesus, who was a cellmate of a friend of mine. He told me later that for the first hour or so, James cursed them from outside in the snow. And then for the second hour, he apologized. He asked them to let him back in. Then he cried and begged them to let him back in. And finally, he curled up into a ball and he fainted. And finally, once he was unconscious, that's when they brought him back in. Well, guess what? That's illegal. That's a felony. That's torture. But that goes on in American prisons every single day. And there's no recourse. It's just like you see in Orange is the New Black. Who are you going to believe? A law enforcement officer or some convicted criminal?
That's chilling. And that, like you just said it, you know, who you're going to believe, the law enforcement or the convicted felon. And that happens in court. And, you know, we write about that as well. They're going to certainly believe a law enforcement officer's word. Somehow a badge magically adds credibility to testimony.
Right.
You say that's going on in prison right now as far as the torture and ISIS. I mean,
no, not at all.
Yeah. One thing I want to ask you too, John, is from the Washingtonian, and this might have to do with what you just addressed somewhat. It says everyone with authority in prison is lying. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Is that kind of what you were just talking about right now?
Yes. In part, that is what I'm talking about. I got in trouble one time because I was having a phone call with my wife, and of course, all calls are recorded, and my calls in particular, they would listen to live just because I was a high-profile troublemaker. And so I told my wife that, I said, you know, everybody I've met in here, and I mean from the guards to the administrators to the warden himself, they're all degenerate liars. Well, as soon as I hung up the phone, I was called to the lieutenant's office. I was berated for saying that they were all degenerate liars. And I looked at the guy and said, but you are. You lie to us every single day. Every word that comes out of your mouth is a lie. And I said, you know, I was eligible for 9 months of halfway house. The warden told me that he would recommend me for 9 months of halfway house. He didn't. He lied. He recommended me for 5 months of halfway house. Well, my unit manager told me that my 5 months was what I had coming to me. It was mandatory that I got 5 months. It was my minimum of halfway house time, which in my case would be converted into house arrest. But that was a lie. What happened was in the sentencing computation office in Texas, they decided that I was so much of a pain in their ass that they weren't going to give me any halfway house time at all. So I said, you guys lied to me at every single level. So the maximum amount of time that I could have spent in prison was 23 months, and I spent 23 months. Finally, the warden approached me after lunch one day outside the cafeteria. Am I allowed to swear on this show?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay. So I'm gonna recount the conversation exactly as it took place. The warden pulled me aside and he said, hey, I know that you called me a liar, but I said, yeah, I did. You know, I'm sorry if you're offended by that, but you did lie to me, and everybody's lied to me. And he says, well, you know why they fucked you, don't you? Because you keep writing that damn blog. And I said, warden, 23 months, 20 months, 18 months, what's the difference? I said, I have gone nose to nose with Al-Qaeda, with Hezbollah, with the Iranians, with some stupid divorce attorney. Do you think I'm afraid of your prison? To spend another 2 months here or another 5 months here? I'm not afraid of you guys. You can't do anything to me that hasn't already been done. And he just kind of harumphed and walked away. And that's how we left it. Now, let me add one more thing. If you are the crooked wife of the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee and you get sentenced to 22 months in a Camp Cupcake minimum security camp, you get 12 months of halfway house. So you actually only do 10 months in Camp Cupcake, and the rest of the time you do it at home.
Wow.
That's the way it works. You know, for a while there, I wished that I was married to the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee.
I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, has this whole experience just made you see our government and our legal system in a
so corrupt? You know what I did? I'm a third-generation Democrat, and I ran screaming from the Democratic Party when this all happened. And I joined the Libertarians, and I'm under no illusion that the Libertarians are going to win a presidential race. I know that the Libertarian Party is a small party, but the Libertarians are the only ones talking about these issues. The Libertarians are the only ones who are talking about protecting and respecting the Constitution. So I'll tell you another thing. In the last election that I was allowed to vote, 2012, I voted for Gary Johnson for president. Gary Johnson was the Libertarian Party's nominee for president, and he's the former Republican governor of New Mexico. I really believed in what Gary Johnson was talking about. Well, when I got to prison, I had been in prison about 3 weeks. And lo and behold, I get a letter from Gary Johnson. And he says that he followed my case, he thought I had been screwed, and he wished that there was some way that he could help me. I immediately wrote back, told him I was a big fan, a supporter, I had voted for him in 2012, and thank you so much for the kindness of paying attention to my case. What I did not know was that he had also written a letter to Eric Holder saying, what's wrong with you? Let this man go home so at least he can work and support his family. It was a very generous thing to do, and he didn't tell me that he had done it. I learned about it later through a Freedom of Information Act request. Well, when I got home from prison 2 years later, one of the first calls that I received was from Gary Johnson.
Wow.
And he said that he was running for president again, and he hoped he could count on my support. And I said, Governor, I said, I am with you all the way. And so I joined the board of the Libertarian Party, and I traveled with Governor Johnson to 18 states on the campaign. In the 3 weeks before the election, we went to 18 states across the West and the Midwest, everywhere from Kalamazoo to Anchorage, Alaska. And I was a proud Libertarian. I remain a proud Libertarian. You know, I've come to the conclusion, and I've been a lifelong political animal. I've been in Washington since the week after I turned 18 years old. I'm very, very political. I always have been. But I've come to the conclusion that on these big thematic issues, there's really very little difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. You know, there are little differences around the edges of these issues. But in terms of the big themes, the big policies, they're essentially the same. And they're both corrupt. And the only party that's talking about freedom and liberty and the rule of law and respect for the Constitution and foreign entanglements is the Libertarians.
Yeah, that's true. I'm actually a Libertarian myself, so and for the same reasons. You know, the Constitution gets used as a doormat by the Republicans, by the Democrats. It really is no different. You got big government for individuals or big government for corporations, and then you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and you want basically no government, right?
I cut this out of today's Wall Street Journal. Cops and robbers all rolled into one. This is an op-ed on the use of, what do they call it? Civil forfeiture, right? You can be stopped for speeding, let's say, and you've got $10,000 in your pocket because you're going to go buy a used car. And the cop says, why do you have $10,000? You say, I'm going to go buy a used car. Cop says, I think you're a drug runner. Well, you've never been charged with any crime. You're just a guy driving down the highway. Maybe you didn't even get a ticket for speeding, but he can legally take your $10,000. That's called civil asset forfeiture. And this piece, again, this is in the Wall Street Journal, which is no liberal newspaper. it says that the federal government seized $4.5 billion from people who had never been charged with crimes versus $3.9 billion that robbers stole from robbing people's homes and businesses. The federal government is actually responsible for stealing more money out of our pockets than burglars and robbers are responsible for stealing.
And Jeff, a big
that happened during the Democrats too. This is not just on Jeff Sessions. This happened during Eric Holder as well. I wrote about it extensively. And this is what I mean when I say on these big thematic issues, there's no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. Well, as Americans, we should be up in arms over this policy. We should be in the streets over this policy. And we're not.
It's horrible. I mean, I've tweeted about it. I'm totally against it. I mean, it's one thing if you're convicted of a crime and then the government comes in and takes your assets, but now with the program they have, you don't even have to be convicted.
No.
They just suspect it. They look.
You don't have to be even formally accused.
Going to do a crime or might do a crime, and they take it. I mean, that's a violation of your due process.
It really is.
It's a constitutional violation, and it's appalling to me.
And somehow the Supreme Court has not found that, and I don't know why. I think it's a travesty.
Well, it might come up before the Supreme Court. You never know.
I hope it does.
Now, does that article, John, mention the bill that's been recently introduced by Senator Rand Paul?
No, actually, and I was disappointed that it didn't. It's long on numbers and a couple of examples, but it does not mention Rand Paul's bill. No, and it should.
Okay.
It should. Frankly, it should have been based on Rand Paul's bill.
I'd like you to mention the books that you've written while in prison and the new one that you just launched. And Sarah, if there's anything else that you'd like to ask John as well.
You know, I want to say thank you to you for your honesty, your integrity, and for agreeing to be a guest on our show. I mean, your story is unbelievable, but believable.
In an odyssey.
Sadly. And it's just, it's something that I think everybody needs to know because, like you said, if somebody wants to go after you and get you for something, they will.
They will.
People need to know that this can happen to anybody, not just somebody who worked in the government. You know, it can happen to any normal, average American.
And that's a message that I think we should be trying to explain, trying to pass to your viewers, that this can happen to anybody. It's not just me because I was in the CIA, or Ed Snowden because he was in NSA, or whatever it is. This can happen to absolutely any American. If they don't like you, they don't like your politics, whatever the reason, they don't like your attitude, they can dig deep enough that they're going to find things to charge you with. And there's almost nothing you can do about it. So thank you both. My books are Doing Time Like a Spy, How the CIA Taught Me to Survive and Thrive in Prison, and The Convenient Terrorist. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you again, John.
Thank you.
Absolutely, John. And just to close for our viewers, I'd like to mention that they can catch our show fresh every first Monday of the month in time, or view it any time afterward right here on our YouTube channel. Also, be sure to subscribe to our blog where we discuss not only the material we've discussed in this show, but other very, very informative topics as well, which you can see at www.stloiyf.org. And if you want to protect yourself to the fullest extent possible against our wildly corrupt legal system, copy of our book, Stack the Legal Odds in Your Favor. And please use the link provided under this video as well, as you will help support our partner, Mr. John Kiriakou, as well. Out that he's just kindly so shared with us on this show. So once again, John, thank you very much for being on the show. It's been an exceptional and informative discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.